I want you to just, imagine the digital cloud for a second.
Yeah, yeah.
Because when you upload a photo from your phone or query an AI to write an email or stream a movie in 4K, it feels completely invisible.
Oh, totally. Like magic.
Yeah, exactly. Like this seamless magic happening somewhere up in the ether. But today, we are going to expose the physical reality and the, frankly, just staggering energy appetite behind those everyday digital tools.
And it is massive.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because that invisible cloud, it's very real. It is made of thousands of tons of concrete, miles of copper wiring, and just an ocean of electricity.
Well, we've abstracted away the physical infrastructure of the internet so well over the last 20 years that, the average person never really has to think about it.
Right, you just press a button and an answer appears.
Exactly. But underneath that interface is a vast network of heavy industrial machinery that's working incredibly hard to generate, like, a single AI response.
So welcome to your custom deep dive. You've brought us a massive, complex stack of sources today.
I have, yeah. There is a lot to get through.
We are looking at institutional research from Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, the IMF, the American Action Forum, and Tech Plus Trends.
Some really heavy hitters.
Yeah. And our mission here is to connect some very large dots. We're going to trace the line from the current AI technology boom straight into the global power grid bottlenecks it's creating.
Which is a huge issue right now.
And then see how that collides with soaring national debts and ultimately unpack what all of this macroeconomic friction means for, well, your everyday wallet.
Because in a market that is moving this fast, seeing the whole board is your ultimate edge.
Exactly. So let's just jump right in.
Sounds good. We really have to start this analysis at the very top of the economic food chain, which right now is obviously the artificial intelligence boom.
Oh, without a doubt.
We're basically watching this incredible software revolution slam face first into its biggest physical limitation, which is the electrical grid.
And that physical limit is colliding with some serious financial optimism. Like if you look at Wall Street, Morgan Stanley is projecting the S&P 500 to hit 7,500 in 2026.
Right.
And a massive chunk of that growth expectation relies entirely on AI transforming productivity.
But the research from Tech Plus Trends outlines a hard ceiling here.
Yeah, and the numbers are wild.
They really are. By this year, 2026, a single AI data center site is demanding anywhere from 100 to 750 megawatts of power.
Wow.
Yeah. And globally, data center electricity demand is crossing 1,000 terawatt hours.
Okay, to put that abstract number into perspective for you, that is double the baseline from just 2023.
It's incredible growth.
It is literally more than the entire energy consumption of the country of Japan just to keep the servers humming.
Right. And to understand why that jump is so violent, we have to look at the mechanics of how AI operates today versus just, a few years ago.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So initially, the tech sector was completely focused on AI training. And training is essentially a burst workload. You feed a massive data set into a supercomputer. It crunches the numbers and builds connections for a few months. It uses a massive spike of power, but then it's finished.
The heavy lifting is done.
Exactly. The model is built.
Yeah.
But today, we have moved into the era of AI inference.
Okay, so if training is like sending the AI to college to read the dictionary.
Right, exactly.
Then inference is when millions of people are actually asking it questions and having real-time conversations.
That's a really great way to look at it.
Yeah.
And inference is continuous. It doesn't stop.
It's just always on.
Always. It is 2047. It is globally distributed. And because everyone from teenagers to Fortune 500 companies is using it, inference now makes up 80 to 90% of the total AI compute load.
Oh, wow. 90%.
Yeah. So you are no longer just bursting power to build a model, right?
Yeah.
You are sustaining a massive continuous draw on the electrical grid every single second of the day to generate those instant answers.
And the hardware required to do that generating is, it's fundamentally changing.
Radically changing.
Like, the new NVIDIA Blackwell rack draws 120 to 140 kilowatts of power. And if you look at the previous generation, the H100 racks, they only drew about 35 to 45 kilowatts.
It's a huge leap.
Right. So we have all these legacy data centers around the world that were built, 5 or 10 years ago to handle maybe 10 to 15 kilowatts a rack.
They're completely outmatched.
Yeah. To use an analogy, taking these new NVIDIA chips and plugging them into a traditional data center is basically like dropping a Formula One engine into a standard golf cart.
Right.
The chassis is quite literally going to melt.
It physically cannot handle the thermal output. The density of these new chips means traditional air conditioning in data centers is entirely obsolete.
Because it's just moving hot air around. Right.
Exactly. The air just cannot carry the heat away fast enough. That's why liquid cooling, where they actually run engineered fluids directly over the processors inside the servers, is no longer a luxury upgrade.
Wow, okay.
It is a strict engineering requirement to prevent catastrophic hardware failure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because, wait, isn't technology supposed to get more efficient over time?
Well, yes and no.
I mean, we went from massive vacuum tube computers that took up whole rooms to smartphones in our pockets. Shouldn't the evolution of tech mean we do more with less power, not more? Why is this sudden power drain a crisis?
What's fascinating here is that you are dealing with a classic economic principle called Jevons paradox.
Okay.
The chips themselves are vastly more efficient. A single Blackwell chip accomplishes significantly more calculations per watt of electricity than previous generations.
So they are doing more with less.
Technically, yes, but because they are so efficient and the KI is so incredibly useful, the demand for the service has just exploded.
Oh, I see.
The sheer volume of global real-time usage is completely swamping those per-chip efficiency gains. The industry has actually had to throw out its old metrics.
Right, they used to track PUE, right, power usage effectiveness.
Yes, PUE essentially just measured how much power went to the actual computers versus the air conditioning and the lights.
Basically the overhead.
Exactly. It was a measure of facility overhead. But now, because power is so incredibly scarce, the only metric anyone actually cares about is tokens per watt.
Tokens being the actual output, so the words generated, the code written, the images rendered.
Yep.
So they are measuring exactly how much intellectual output you get for every single drop of electricity burned.
That is the new baseline for profitability.
Yeah.
And because delivering that electricity is now the absolute bottleneck for the entire technology sector, the smartest capital in the world is migrating.
Where is it going?
Well, it is just flowing into slick software startups anymore. It is flowing heavily into the physical, dirty, concrete, and steel infrastructure required to generate and house that power.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that completely shifts the narrative.
Yep.
We always hear comparisons to the gold rush, but looking at the shift, it feels much more like the 1849 gold rush, where the people getting rich aren't necessarily the ones panning for gold. It's the ones selling the pickaxes, the concrete, and the electricity. You cannot have the digital economy without the physical one.
And Goldman Sachs has identified this as a massive new investment trend they call HALO stocks.
HALO. Okay, what does that stand for?
HALO stands for heavy assets, low obsolescence. We are talking about highly capital-intensive industries. Utility companies, telecom providers, electrical grid operators.
The physical backbone.
Exactly, the stuff that doesn't become obsolete in 6 months like a software app might.
And the performance gap here is eye-opening. According to the data, in emerging markets, these HALO stocks, the heavy asset companies, have surged 115% since late 2025.
That is massive.
Compare that to the capital light software stocks, which are only up about 7% in the same period.
Right.
Yet, despite that massive run-up, these heavy asset stocks still trade at a 20% discount compared to their tech sector peers.
Because for over a decade, the prevailing wisdom was that software is eating the world. Investors completely ignored the physical world because software has incredible margins. Right?
You build it once and sell it 1,000,000 times.
Exactly. But you simply cannot run a 500-megawatt AI facility on software alone. Right now, if a tech company wants to plug a new data center into the grid in a major hub, they are facing connection wait times of 4 to 7 years.
4 to 7 years just to get permission to turn the lights on. That is insane.
Why is the lag time so extreme? Is it just a bureaucratic permitting issue?
Permitting is a huge part of it, especially for high-voltage transmission lines. But it's also a physical supply chain problem.
Like getting the actual parts.
Right. The massive transformers required to step down power from the grid to the data center are heavily backordered. You have shortages of raw copper wiring. The physical world simply moves slower than code.
Which is forcing the tech giants to get very creative with a bring-your-own-power strategy.
Oh, absolutely.
We're seeing companies looking at small modular reactors, literally building their own nuclear power plants.
Yeah, but nuclear takes 5 to 10 years to permit and construct safely. So as a bridge to get power now, they are turning to on-site natural gas plants. They can deploy those in 12 to 18 months, even though they have to swallow the carbon emissions and the regulatory risks associated with fossil fuels.
And this brings up a critical geopolitical divergence. Energy availability is no longer just a corporate headache. It is acting as a hard industrial ceiling for entire nations.
Oh, that makes sense.
Look at the energy cost divide. The U.S. currently has a massive competitive advantage on the global stage because industrial electricity is relatively cheap, around 8 cents per kilowatt hour, largely thanks to the shale and natural gas boom.
While over in the European Union, the cost is hovering around 20 cents per kilowatt hour.
It's a huge disadvantage.
That is a staggering difference for a facility burning hundreds of megawatts an hour. And it's not that the EU isn't trying to generate power.
Right.
The research notes they have 120 gigawatts of renewable energy projects just stuck in connection queues. They have the wind and the solar ready to go, but they can't physically integrate it into the grid.
Because they lack the high-voltage transmission lines to move the power from where the wind blows to where the data centers are actually located.
Right.
This is precisely why historically boring sectors are becoming the superstars of this decade. Utility companies like NextEra Energy or data center real estate investment trusts like Digital Realty Trust.
They are the gatekeepers.
Exactly. They own the land, they have the grid connections, and they control the physical capacity that the entire AI revolution desperately needs to exist.
Okay, so we have this massive private sector boom. Hundreds of billions, eventually trillions of dollars are required to build out these data centers, nuclear reactors, natural gas pipelines, and grid upgrades.
It's a staggering amount of capital.
But this massive wave of private investment is colliding head-on with unprecedented government spending. We are entering a macroeconomic environment defined by what looks like a trillion-dollar tug-of-war.
Yeah, you really cannot analyze the private sector in a vacuum right now. You have to look at sovereign debt, because the scale of government borrowing is directly impacting the cost of capital for everyone else.
And the numbers from the American Action Forum really put this into perspective.
Oh, they're sobering.
The U.S. budget deficit, just the shortfall for this year alone, was over $1.2 trillion in merely the first 8 months of fiscal year 2026.
It's massive.
The total accumulated national debt is sitting at $31.5 trillion. But here is the mechanism that really shocked me. U.S. interest payments on that national debt are now larger than the entire national defense budget.
It is a profound milestone. When a sovereign nation spends more capital simply servicing the interest on past debt than it does on securing its borders, it fundamentally restricts its future economic flexibility.
Yeah.
And to understand how we got here, we had to look at the fiscal policy driving the economy.
Right, and looking purely at the economic mechanics, regardless of any political leanings or intentions behind the legislation, the sources heavily cite the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBA.
Right.
This legislation includes major tax cuts alongside heavy spending provisions. Mechanically, it is acting as a massive fiscal stimulus.
Exactly.
It is aggressively pumping money into the economy, keeping consumer demand high, and keeping the broader economy running incredibly hot.
And a red-hot economy driven by government spending creates friction with the central banks, whose job is to actually control inflation.
Ah.
The IMF calls this current global phenomenon hawkish divergence. In the U.S., the Federal Reserve is trapped in a hawkish hold.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning they are being forced to keep interest rates higher for longer, with terminal yields projected to stay between 3.5% and 4.5%, specifically to act as a counterweight to all that government spending.
So if I'm a listener trying to make sense of this, it sounds incredibly contradictory.
It is.
The government is essentially stomping on the economic gas pedal by pumping trillion-dollar spending bills into the economy, while the Federal Reserve is desperately pulling the emergency brake by keeping interest rates high to slow down the exact same economy.
Yeah, it's the exact tension defining the market.
Yeah.
And it is rippling across the globe. While the U.S. Federal Reserve holds the brake, the Bank of Japan has totally reversed a decades-long strategy.
Oh, yeah, this is huge.
For years, Japan utilized negative interest rates to fight off deflation. It was effectively free money. But now, facing global inflation, they have been forced to hike rates to 1.00% and look to be heading toward 1.50%.
Which is triggering a massive earthquake in global finance regarding the carry trade.
Yes, carry trade unwind.
Let me see if I have the mechanics of this right. For years, massive institutional investors would borrow yen in Japan because the interest rate was essentially zero.
Right.
They would take that cheap money, convert it, and buy higher-yielding assets in the U.S. or Europe, like treasury bonds paying 4 or 5%, and just pocket the difference.
Yep. It was a very reliable trade.
But now that Japan is raising rates, that math completely blows up.
It blows up spectacularly. Because as Japanese rates rise, the value of the yen strengthens. Suddenly, those investors owe much more on their original loans.
Wow, okay.
To cover those margins, they are forced to sell their U.S. and European assets and move the money back to Japan.
So a central bank decision in Tokyo literally forces a massive sell-off that pulls liquidity straight out of U.S. markets, directly impacting the value of a regular person's 401k.
Exactly that. It drains the pool of available capital globally. And this complex cross-current of high inflation, high rates, and shifting global liquidity is breaking traditional investment models.
Like what?
Well, the old reliable 60-40 portfolio, where you keep 60% of your money in stocks for growth and 40% in bonds for safety, is currently broken.
Because bonds are supposed to be the shock absorber, right?
Right, that was the idea, yeah.
When stocks go down, bonds usually hold steady or go up. But right now, equities and bonds are moving in the exact same direction. They are both hypersensitive to inflation data.
Very much so.
If inflation ticks up, the Fed threatens to keep rates high, which hurts corporate growth for stocks, but it also decimates the yield value of existing bonds. There is nowhere to hide.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this monetary tension is why analysts at J.P. Morgan are warning of a 35% recession risk.
That's a high probability.
It is. They aren't just worried about a natural business cycle downturn. They are terrified of a policy error.
Meaning the central banks make a mistake?
Yes. A scenario where the Fed over-tightens interest rates right into the teeth of a supply shock. They try so hard to offset the government's fiscal expansion that they accidentally crush the entire economy.
Which naturally brings us to the foundation of this entire system, which is the consumer reality check.
The most important part.
Right. Because while hyperscalers are spending billions on data centers and governments are managing trillions in debt, the everyday consumer is walking an incredibly dangerous tightrope.
The disconnect between what Wall Street expects and what Main Street is actually experiencing is staggering right now. Morgan Stanley's market outlook is priced for absolute perfection.
Right. Analysts are currently expecting 14 to 16% earnings per share growth in 2026.
Which is very aggressive.
And because the tech sector's growth is largely baked in, for the broader market to hit those numbers, non-tech companies basically need to double their earnings pace from 2025.
Yeah.
That leaves a razor-thin margin for error. If everyday consumer brands miss those earnings by even a fraction, the stock market could see a violent correction.
But when you look at where those massive corporate earnings actually have to come from, which is the wallet of the average citizen, the picture is deeply fractured.
It really is.
We are looking at a bifurcated consumer base. The excess savings that households built up during the pandemic stimulus era, they are completely gone.
Wiped out.
Student loan repayments have resumed. And those high interest rates the Fed is holding to fight inflation, they are trickling down and biting incredibly hard into credit card balances and auto loans.
It is creating a very strange barbell economy in retail.
How so?
Well, on one hand, consumers are dealing with intense inflation fatigue by trading down on essentials. They are skipping the name brand cereals and buying store brand groceries just to make the math work at the end of the month.
Right, the everyday squeeze.
But at the exact same time, they are hoarding whatever cash they have left to splurge on highly memorable experiences, like international travel or major concert tours.
Ah, I see.
They are cutting out the middle-tier consumer goods entirely to fund both survival and escapism.
And that already fragile consumer is facing mounting risks from multiple angles. Domestically, there are significant political and regulatory risks. There are proposed affordability policies being debated, like federally capping credit card interest rates.
Which sounds great for the consumer.
It sounds fantastic for the struggling consumer. But if implemented, it would drastically slash the earnings of the massive financial sector, which again threatens that perfect Wall Street growth scenario we just talked about.
Then you add in the global friction. The sources highlight rising tensions with U.S. involvement in Venezuela and NATO military maneuvering in Greenland. The geopolitical board is incredibly unstable right now.
Which leads directly to the most severe risk outlined in the Hoisington Research Report, which is the threat of a cost-push recession driven specifically by an oil shock.
Okay, let's make sure we clearly define that because it operates differently than what people normally expect from a recession.
Definitely.
Normally, in a demand-driven recession, people lose their jobs, they stop buying things, so companies have to lower prices to attract buyers. Deflation.
Right, that's the textbook scenario.
Yeah. But a cost-push recession means prices are going up not because people are buying more, but because a supply shock, like a geopolitical conflict disrupting oil, suddenly makes it drastically more expensive to literally turn the lights on, run the delivery trucks, and manufacture goods.
That is the exact mechanism.
Hmm.
The cost of inputs pushes the final price up, regardless of consumer demand. The Hoisington report calculates that a 30 to 40% spike in fuel and utilities could cost U.S. households up to $300 billion this year alone.
$300 billion, which is just a tragic irony because that number perfectly wipes out the entire macroeconomic benefit of the recent tax refunds that consumers just received.
It becomes a complete wash.
The money comes into the household in one hand and goes straight out the door to the utility company and the gas station in the other.
Exactly.
It really highlights the extreme disconnect we are seeing. Wall Street is expecting corporate earnings to double, but Main Street consumers are standing in the grocery aisle literally deciding between store-brand cereal and paying their rising electric bill.
This raises an important question, though, about the limits of monetary policy. A cost-push inflation scenario is the Federal Reserve's ultimate nightmare.
Why is that?
Well, imagine an oil shock hits tomorrow. Prices at the pump skyrocket. The consumer, who is already stretched thin, begins to buckle. If the Fed steps in and cuts interest rates to help relieve the consumer's debt burden, they essentially pour gasoline on the inflation fire, causing prices to rise even faster.
But if they do the opposite and keep interest rates high to aggressively fight that inflation, they crush the household completely with expensive debt on top of high gas prices, triggering a massive recession. They are basically trapped.
They are completely boxed in. The only tools a central bank has, interest rates and money supply, only affect the demand side of the economy.
Right.
A central bank cannot drill for more oil. They cannot build more high-voltage power lines. They cannot manufacture transformers or lay copper wire. They cannot fix a physical supply problem with a financial tool.
Wow. Okay, let's pull all these threads together.
Sounds good.
We started by looking at the intense physical heat melting the racks of modern AI processors, which is sparking a frantic global race for megawatts and raw physical infrastructure.
The Halo stocks.
Right. And we watched that massive private sector infrastructure investment collide with a trillion-dollar macroeconomic tug-of-war between government deficit spending and central banks fighting inflation.
A hawkish divergence.
Yes, exactly. And finally, we landed on the squeezed American consumer, walking a tightrope, trying to balance rising utility bills and exhausted savings, while the stock market demands perfect corporate earnings.
It is a profoundly delicate, interconnected system. A bottleneck in data center cooling technology in Virginia ripples out to sovereign debt markets in Tokyo and ultimately dictates the interest rate on a credit card and the price of groceries in your hometown.
Which is exactly why having this overarching view is so critical. If you only look at the software, you miss the power grid. If you only look at the grid, you miss the debt.
That's right.
We want to thank you for bringing this incredible stack of research to our attention. Staying well-informed and seeing the invisible mechanisms connecting these events is your ultimate edge in a market that is priced for absolute perfection.
Understanding the heavy physical constraints of our digital world completely changes how you will read every economic headline from now on.
It really does. And we want to leave you with a brand new thread to pull on, something for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think back to our opening image, the invisible digital cloud, which we now know is actually heavily dependent on physical assets like concrete, copper, transformers, and regional power grids.
The physical reality.
Right. If the future of AI, and by extension the future of global economic supremacy, relies entirely on those heavy physical assets, what happens to the untouchable tech giants if those physical supply chains are suddenly weaponized, heavily tariffed, or cut off entirely by a geopolitical rival?
Oh, wow. It exposes the ultimate vulnerability of a purely digital strategy.
Exactly. Ask yourself, in the digital economy of the future, who really holds the ultimate power? Is it the visionary who writes the code in Silicon Valley? Or the entity that controls the raw copper and the power grid required to run it?
That is a fascinating question.
Think about that the next time you casually ask an AI a question. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.